Musical differences. Paul III also commissioned an internal inquiry into the state of the Church. When it reported in 1537, its harsh conclusions were leaked and gleefully printed by Protestant presses. It was one of the first leaked inquiries in history. But the Protestants were leaking as well. Not literally, obviously. Well, in some ways, I suppose, but let's not go there. In 1540, Philip of Hesse, the leading Protestant aristocrat, decided to make an honest woman of his mistress, Margaret, and married her. Unfortunately, he forgot the little matter of his already being married, and so was technically a bigamist. This would have been terrible PR for the Protestant cause had it been revealed, not to mention the fact that bigamy carried the death penalty in the empire. So he more or less forced Luther, Melanchthon, and Bucer, the Protestant leader in Strasbourg, to approve the marriage and prepare a document providing theological support for bigamy. To help them come to the right decision, he added that if they didn't approve of this marriage, he could always get back to the Catholics. But it was impossible to keep hidden. Luther proposed that they should issue a good strong lie. Melanchthon, who was less morally flexible, fell ill under the stress. The scandal meant the end of Philip's leadership of the cause. Luther's willingness to be economical with the truth has also rather been swept under the carpet. Talking of marriage, Bucer and Melanchthon were amongst those who were still hoping for a reconciliation between Protestant and Catholic. They attended talks in Regensburg in 1541, which were attended by delegations of both Protestants and Catholics. They managed to pass a number of agreements, but the problem was that every time they moved forward, either Luther or the Pope, or both, would repudiate what had just been agreed. Frankly, it was too late. The marriage was over. There were irreconcilable differences. The moderates were beaten, the hardliners had won, and all that was left was to argue over who got custody of the heretics. Indeed, Cardinal Contarini, who had led the papal delegation to Regensburg, returned to Rome, was accused of heresy, and died under house arrest. In his place, a hardline traditionalist, Cardinal Carafa, took charge. He was head of the Roman Inquisition, and utterly dedicated to rooting out Italian Protestants and crushing them. Carafa took his job so seriously, he had a new house built for himself, with its very own dungeons. Talk about taking your work home with you. In 1545, Pope Paul decided the time had come to return to traditional means. He called that most traditional of things a church council. It met in Trent, not the river in Nottingham, but Trento in Italy, and it was a biggie. In all, the council meetings lasted for a whopping 18 years, split into 3 chunks. It was not what you might call a broadly based council. Out of about 600 Catholic bishops in Europe, only 28 actually attended. This was an elite group of power brokers. Trent concluded that the Bible could not be the only source of truth. The Church is also the vehicle of divinely ordained doctrine and traditions. And while clearly the Church could not veto bits of Scripture, it could declare that no one should use their own judgment to distort Scriptures in accordance with his own conceptions, which meant in any sense other than that which the Holy Mother Church holds. Among its other conclusions were a reaffirmation of the 7 sacraments and a condemnation of the idea of justification by faith alone. Justification was offered by God on the basis of human cooperation. It was not the simple one-way gift which Luther preached. Original sin was reaffirmed, a pop at many Anabaptists who had denied it and gone all Pelagian. The Council of Trent was the first time that Catholicism was called Roman. It was also the first council to ban a musical interval, the augmented fourth, aka the diminished fifth. It was thought to be the devil's interval. Bloody Mary. By 1555, then, significant lumps of Europe were Protestant. The majority of Germany, the Swiss cities, Scandinavia, and England. Oh, no, hang on. No, England had reverted. They had woken up and smelt the burning. Despite the 6 marriages, Henry VIII died, leaving only 1 son and 2 daughters. Edward became king, aged 9, and was taken in hand by Protestants. A Protestant liturgy, modelled on Luther's services, had been produced by Archbishop Cranmer. English Bibles had been printed. A new prayer book had been produced, which omitted many traditional rites and rituals. But Edward died young. In 1553, he was succeeded by his elder sister, Mary. She is known as Bloody Mary, and is the only queen to have a cocktail named after her. Unless there's a Queen Harvey Wallbanger out there somewhere. Mary was Catholic with a capital C-A-T-H. Cath. Her mother was Catherine of Aragon, the divorced and embittered first wife of Henry VIII. Her life had been ruined by the Reformation, and now it was payback time. Mary was determined to rid England of Protestantism by whatever means necessary. She wasn't entirely alone in her wish. The pace of change in the reign of Edward VI had unsettled many people. There was even an uprising in the southwest of England, where the leaders called not only for the restoration of the Latin Mass, but also for a ban on the English Bible. Within a month of ascending the throne, she banned the public reading of the Bible. The English Bible was not to be used in church services, and Bibles placed in church were taken out and burned. Then she started burning people. In her reign, 300 Protestants were burned, including 5 bishops, one of whom was Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Archbishop Cranmer initially recanted to save his life, but Mary decided to burn him anyway, so he withdrew his initial recantation and plunged the hand that had written it into the fire first. The bulk of those martyred under Mary, however, were not famous or wealthy or influential. They were ordinary tradesmen and labourers and women. It was not only cruel and barbaric, it was incredibly dumb. Mary's policy created a wealth of Protestant martyrs whose courage did more to establish Protestantism than the prayer book ever did. Nevertheless, it was the kind of policy that thrilled the new Pope, none other than Pope Paul IV, the artist formerly known as Cardinal Carafa, he of the feature article in Home and Torture Chamber magazine. Paul IV banned travelling entertainers and dancing, and had fig leaves painted on the nude figures of the Sistine Chapel. He was a kind of reverse Calvin, Niblack. What Paul IV had really excelled at was hatred, and he was an equal opportunities hater. It wasn't just the Protestants. He hated Jews, humanists, Spaniards. In 1557, he also started one of the Catholic Church's most notorious practices, the Index of Forbidden Books. It listed some 550 authors whose works were not to be read, including theologians like Luther and Calvin, works of botany and geography, and the complete run of Venetian Playboy. Its last major update was in 1948, but it was officially abolished in 1966 by Pope Paul VI, who, like everyone in the 60s, was probably keen to read some Jean-Paul Sartre. Paul IV's hatred went on to find more disturbingly physical form. He rounded up the Jews in Rome and forced them into ghettos. They had to wear yellow hats. His paranoia convinced him that the Jews were secretly in league with the Protestants. Paul IV died in 1559, and the people of Rome immediately acted like people coming out of the control of a dictatorship, which in a way they were. The offices of the Inquisition were destroyed, and the prisoners released. All the files were burnt, and the Pope statue was dismembered. Moderate Queen Bess. The year before Pope Paul IV died, the other big fan of tough-love Catholicism, Queen Mary, died as well. She left no heir. The crown went to Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And Anne had been a strong, Bible-believing Protestant, the very reason, in fact, that the Church of England was invented. So, England sort of snapped back in the other direction. But it didn't go so far this time. Elizabeth managed to ensure that England stayed Protestant, but without entirely ridding the country of all traces of traditional Catholicism. There were still robes and vestments, saints' days, stained glass and ornaments. And although many Protestants hoped she would move further in the direction of Geneva, as it were, she never did. She and her advisers had invented an expression of Christianity in which virtually everyone was perpetually mildly disappointed, or, to use its technical term, Anglicanism. Many refugees who returned from Geneva hated Elizabeth's middle way. They became known as Puritans. Deeply opposed to the Anglican establishment, they saw the Church as still infected with the dregs of popery. Their movement had significant support, and learning from Luther, it harnessed the power of the new media, the printing press. The best-selling book was John Foxe's Book of Martyrs, which listed in gruesome detail the martyrdoms of Protestants, not just during Mary's reign, but during Henry's as well. But, like a really annoying driver on the motorway, Elizabeth refused to budge from the middle lane. Under Elizabeth, Anglicanism was fanatical about only one thing: moderation. And grudgingly, the various factions accepted it. After all, the only alternatives were Mary, Queen of Scots, who had the backing of the French as the rightful queen, and Philip of Spain. And no one wanted either of those. Our friends in the north. Mary's hold on the throne of Scotland, however, was decidedly dodgy. She was a Catholic, but her own land was rigorously, thoroughly Protestant. Scotland's religious landscape was dominated by the preacher, John Knox. He was a man who had suffered for his Protestant beliefs. He had spent a year and a half as a galley slave for his role in the Protestant uprising, after which he had been a refugee in both England, under King Edward, and then Geneva. This was not a man whose life had been a bundle of laughs, except at the burning of Michael Servetus. He was present at that, and found it quite amusing, apparently. The rest of the time, though, well, let's just say he was a winner of the Man Least Likely to be Named Chuckles Award, 13 years running. And Scottish Protestants, Puritans, reflected that grim tone. These were people who thought that Calvin was a bit too happy-go-lucky. In May 1559, Knox led an armed uprising, and gained power, even though Mary remained on the throne. All Catholic expressions of Christianity were outlawed. It was Calvinism. Knox wrote a book called The First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women, which probably tells you all you need to know, unless he was just playing hard to get. Knox applied what became known as a Presbyterian system of church government, from that old Greek word presbyteros. It was a nationwide network of presbyters who gathered together in national synods to make decisions. One presbyter, one vote. Mary, however, refused to toe the line. She deliberately carried on with her Catholic observance, not to mention her scandalous sex life. It was a classic power struggle between the Queen and the Parliament, and the Queen lost. In 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favour of her one-year-old son, James. She fled south to England, seeking the protection of her stepsister. James remained in Scotland, to be brought up by Scottish Calvinists. It was probably the least fun childhood ever, and he never forgot it.